The touch focus and camera control isn't what's most exciting about the Portkeys LH7P. This monitor has so many of those. Why don't more monitors have this feature or that feature, like area limited zebras or screen grabs, just to name two. But the most important or the most interesting feature, at least for me, is the size of the screen and how that affects you or me when I'm out shooting and seeing everything on that bigger screen. I mean, who doesn't like a big screen, right? So hi there, my name is Thomas. It's nice to have you here. Today we're talking about the Portkeys LH7P. Now this monitor got a bright 7-inch 1000 nit FRC display, and despite being bigger than your average 5.5-inch, it's actually pretty lightweight and nimble. It currently sells for about $349 and comes in this little hard case, along with a couple of things like a screen protector, or actually two of them, which I managed to sabotage. There's also a cold shoe mount and this little USB-C memory stick. Now, let me give you a quick little exterior tour so you can get a better idea of how everything looks, where everything sits, and all that fun stuff. So, like I said earlier, this monitor is surprisingly slim and lightweight for a 7-inch. We got mounting points on 3 different sides, HDMI in and out here at the base, along with a headphone jack, USB-A, and a DC input. Now, on the top, we have 4 of these customizable function buttons that allows you to bring up things like zebras, false colors, or grids with a press of a button. We got our power switch right here, and this little button will lock the screen. And we got our battery release button. Now, here's something worth knowing. My battery plate was or felt a bit stubborn until I kind of realized by mistake almost that you need to press the battery release button when you're mounting a battery as well as when you're detaching it, if that makes any sense. When I hold in the button, every battery that I've tried, and I think I have like 5 or 6 different MPF brands in-house, they all go in smooth as ever, just like so. But if I don't hold in that button, they usually don't want to line up here on the back. Yeah, you need to just hold down the battery release button. If you do, then everything will be smooth sailing. Bigger monitors like this usually comes in a bit lower when it comes to pixel density than your typical or average 5.5-inch, which today normally sits around 400 ppi. But to give you just a bit of context, if we compare this to a 5K computer monitor, those usually sits around 200 to 220 ppi. So you're not going to run into any issues when it comes to critical focus pulling. Okay, let's look at the operating system and some of the onboard features. And as always, just to save time, I'm gonna gloss over some of the more common ones that we see on all monitors, like focus peaking, that sort of stuff, and focus on some of the more unique ones on the LH7P. This monitor uses Portkeys' relatively new Move Norm operating system, which I do like, and I've almost forgotten how the old one looked. One thing I can say though is that it's a bit different because it's laid out in more horizontal fashion. So if you're someone used to more vertically aligned menus on your monitors, it might take your brain just a couple of minutes to adjust. Setting up and calibrating your monitor for color accuracy or for your personal preference is also super easy. We got plenty of tools here that lets us adjust chroma, brightness, contrast, and all that fun stuff. Now, Portkeys also added something similar to OC's probe location feature called Live Mode. Now, this here is going to be important, so I'm going to do my best to explain it as quick as possible. But with Live Mode on, your exposure tools like your zebras, your waveforms, scopes, all that fun stuff will be based on what you're actually seeing on the screen, including if you're applying any look or any conversion LUTs on the screen. Those are going to be affecting how the zebras shows up in the terms of IRE values and that sort of stuff. But with Live Mode turned off, your zebras and everything else is going to be based on the signal coming from your camera, whether that's a log signal, Rec 79, HLG, or something else. Just be mindful of how these different things or these different modes on or off affect those levels. And speaking of zebras and the area option, it's another interesting or neat feature that allows you to keep your zebras to selected parts of the frame. If you're a fan of zebras, I think you're gonna like this, and if you're not a fan, or at least not in the past, maybe this feature will make them a bit more tolerable to you. Now let's talk about camera control and touch focus. So Portkeys is actually one of very few monitors that actually offers camera control and touch focus on select camera models. And I will put the current ones up here on the screen so you can see if your one is one of the lucky few, and a link down below because I'm sure they will add more versions or more models as we go along. Now, personally, I think that Portkeys did this whole camera control and touch focus way better than Atomos did on their Shinobi 2, but that's a topic for another video. So on the Portkeys monitors, the connection is wireless over either Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It kind of depends on which camera brand or camera models you're working with. I'm using the Wi-Fi connection on my Sony cameras, and the only thing that I've come across so far that's kind of not super is the fact that Sony cameras, for some reason, at least the ones that I have, the FX30 and the A7 IV, don't seem to be outputting the little focus box when you tap on a subject for tracking or spot AF. But all of these functions works really well, whether it's tap to focus, start and stop recording, or changing any of your camera settings. I also really appreciate the red little box we get on the screen when we press record. Especially if you're an A7 IV shooter like I am, it's good to know that you're actually recording. Wow, look at that Pecker. Now, a quick thank you to Motion Ray for sponsoring this video. Now, if you didn't know, Motion Ray got this huge library online full with motion graphics, templates, LUTs, music, sound effects, stock video, stock footage. They even got this clever AI-powered voiceover engine. And all of these things under just one membership or subscription. And if you're a Premiere user, you can now search and browse for music and sound effects directly from Premiere Pro with the Premiere Pro extension, which makes finding music, sound effects, and all of that fun stuff so much easier because now you can just drag and drop those tracks straight onto your timeline. And Motion Ray actually makes it super easy to add all of those little extra things to really up the production value, whether it's for your own personal work or if you're dealing with clients, that sort of stuff. It doesn't really matter when it comes to Motion Ray. Now, they also got a ton of these super easy to use drag and drop VFX plugins that you can use for adding subtle things like heat distortion or maybe a subtle little tasty anamorphic flare, or you can add more dramatic and creative VFX as well. There's even a ton of free assets over at motionray.com, so head on over, check it out to get a better feel for what Motion Ray is all about. Now, thank you Motion Ray for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the monitor and I will take a closer look at that Pecker over there. See you in a bit. The last interesting feature that I want to bring up is the screen grabs, which can be saved to the little included USB flash drive. This is actually a super useful and kind of interesting feature that we don't see on a lot of monitors. These screen grabs can be used for overlays if you're doing match cuts or for continuity, and you can also obviously grab a couple of behind the scenes screen grabs and share those on social media. I mean, you could do a lot of things with this feature. Now, before we get to my pet peeves, I just want to touch on battery life. So if I'm not using a V-mount to power my entire rig, I do prefer to use these smaller MPF750s. They're a bit smaller and they won't end up dipping into your frame if you're tilting your monitor forward. And one of these little batteries will give me usually around 3.5 to 4 hours of runtime, which I think is perfectly acceptable. So 2 of these, maybe 2.5 if I add 550, will definitely get me through an entire day of shooting. And as far as latency goes, I haven't actually noticed any lagginess above normal. In fact, I think the overall latency on the Portkeys LH7P is pretty good. Now, let me tell you what I don't like about this monitor, my pet peeves or whatever I want to call them. So first off, some of these ports here at the bottom, like the USB-A and the HDMI out, can get obstructed by certain monitor mounts. Make sure that you're using a monitor mount with a narrow base Secondly, and I mean, it's not a deal breaker per se, but I would like to have seen a little USB-C power delivery port on this monitor. Another thing I want to bring up is the built-in fan, which isn't adjustable and there's no way to turn it off completely. But in my experience, even when shooting indoors, it hasn't really caused any major issues. Now, this monitor and the Viltrox DCX3 have been the most used monitors in this household over the last couple of months. 1000 nits is usually enough for daylight use, unless you're shooting in some very bright or extreme conditions. In that case, you might want to pick up the additional sun hood. Looks like this. I haven't actually, I mean, we've had winter here in Sweden, so no sun to kind of combat with sun hood, but there is a sun hood available, and I will put a link to the sun hood along with a monitor and a couple of other things like top handles, cables, that sort of stuff. So all in all, yeah, it's definitely one of my absolute favorite monitors to work with. I think the screen is looking nice, it's very responsive. The feeling of seeing your image on this much bigger screen obviously makes shooting more enjoyable, and if you're shooting anamorphic or you're cropping for social media, that sort of stuff, using guidelines on the monitor, everything will be much easier for you on a bigger monitor. So yeah, I highly recommend you to pick up the Portkeys LH7P. Now, if you're still on the fence about this monitor right here, check out this video where I'm comparing 9 different monitors, including this one. So yeah, maybe your next monitor will be one of those. Thank you so much for stopping by. Drop me a line below if you have any questions, but I will see you in the next one. Goodbyes.